Well, as I read this story in preparation for this morning, I asked you where your focus might have gone. My focus actually went to the phrase, you give them something to eat. So here we are in the stewardship season. Our theme this year is Saints Alive, Living Generously. 2 weeks ago, we spoke of the joy of giving. Last week, we considered the transformation that can happen in people's lives when we give. And this week, we are considering generous living. In other words, I'd like to ask you, are you living your life in such a way as to glorify God by doing your part? And when you do your part, as you feel God has called you to do it, do you do it happily? Do you do it with a positive spirit? Do you do it with a sense of excellence? Are you living generously? Consider our text for this morning. Jesus and the disciples have been engaged in the Lord's ministry. They have answered the call that Jesus offered to them earlier when he said, "Come and follow me, and I will make you fishers of men." And I wonder what they thought that ministry was going to be like. They probably thought it was going to be easier than actually fishing for real fish and more profitable than being a tax collector. I'm sure that when they started out on their adventure with Jesus, they were excited and they were positive and they thought, hey, Jesus, he's the man. And when everyone else realizes that he's the man, they will serve him. And if we are his closest disciples, then they will serve us too. But things do not unfold as they had probably expected. This ministry stuff, it was hard work. Now, granted, it was exciting, but it was difficult. Jesus had just recently sent the apostles out on their first mission. And Jesus at times would send them out 2 by 2 to announce the coming of the kingdom of God. And if you recall, he would instruct them, do not take too much with you. Yours is to be a life not of leisure, but of simplicity. And Jesus would have to remind them, I have not come to be served, but to serve. And I want you to serve alongside me. And I think that's just like us. Disciples in this day and age, we want to be Christians. We want to serve Christ. And we want the accolades and the attention and the approval of doing what God has called us to be and to do. The apostles came back to Jesus after that first missionary work. They were full of wondering joy. They were eager to tell what they had done and taught. Now note that order. What they had done and taught, which hints that they thought more of the miracles that they had been able to perform on account of Jesus than of the actual message of God's love come to the world in human flesh. They were flushed and excited by success, and they needed a little calming down and a little physical rest. So Jesus, knowing their need, bids them to come along with him into some healing solitude and to rest a while. Now, in the midst of all that, there's some sad news that comes their way and they meets their ears. They have heard recently the disheartening news of the cruel death of John the Baptist. Whoa! John was killed? How could that happen? He was one of God's main people. So following this, their first mission, and this disturbing news, the apostles have now withdrawn with Jesus, perhaps to be with their grief, possibly to compose themselves for the difficult work that lies ahead. But look at what Mark tells us. They went away in the boat to a deserted place by themselves. Now, have you ever been so tired? I mean, it might have been good work that you accomplished, but you're so tired, or maybe you're just so disheartened over the loss of a loved one, just like the disciples that day. Yes, tired. You were excited about the work. You celebrated what was accomplished, but now you look to the future. You know what there's out there? There's more work. There's actually more work out there than you've already accomplished, and you feel tired. Or maybe you're disheartened. You thought you were doing what God wanted you to do, but things have not turned out as you had thought they would. I mean, look, one of the good guys, John the Baptist, was killed, tired, disheartened. You need a little time for yourself. So Mark tells us now, many saw the apostles going to that place of rest, and they recognized the disciples, and so they hurried on foot to the towns and arrived ahead of them. Sometimes life is like that. You need a moment to catch your breath, but people still come to you with issues and with needs and problems. The events and people of life make demands of us. Deal with me. I don't care how tired you are. I don't care how you feel at this moment. I need you right now. I call such times a life-in-your-face moment. They can happen almost every day. I remember a wonderful Christian couple telling me about the raising of their 3 children. They were now grown. But the husband, who was a very good lawyer, recalled how it was when his children were young. He said that he would get home from work exhausted from all the cases that he had worked on that day and had demanded his attention. And maybe the outcome of 1 or 2 of the cases had not gone his way. And his wife would meet him at the door with a baby in her arms saying, "Here, you take him. I have to have a minute of peace." And he would mumble under his breath something like, "Well, at least let me put my briefcase down." But she was not deterred. We all know that feeling, don't we? Here is where this lesson from the gospel intersects our lives. Can we live generously, even if we're tired, even if we may be disheartened, but knowing that no matter what life hands us, Jesus is in charge? And that's key. Do we have the faith, a faith great enough to be able to do what Christ has asked, even if we're tired, even if we're disheartened, even if we have doubts that it can happen? Significantly, this is one of the few stories of Jesus that is told by all 4 of the gospel writers. Something important is transmitted in this teaching of Jesus. For I believe that we all have life in our face moments. And note this, with life in our face, what do we tend to do? We tend to rush ahead and fixate on what is done rather than upon the message of love. And in this instance, we read the story in Mark chapter 6, and we focus on what Jesus did and not his message of who he is, the Son of God, come to earth in human flesh. See, we like to focus on the miracles because that's what wows us. I think most of us hear this story in Mark 6 and we focus in on Jesus blessing the bread and breaking the bread. We revel in the miracle of multiplication, the wonder of how God provides. And it is a miracle, I admit. However, in our haste, I believe that we miss a profound message that Jesus wishes for us to know. Now, I have to interject. Have you ever thought to yourself that Jesus can, at times, be unreasonable in what he asks us to do? I always think here of the Great Commission. Go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations. Make disciples of all nations. That's a great call, but I mean, really? I mean, which nation have you been asked to make disciples of? China? Japan? Australia? Canada? South America? Jesus seems to be a little unreasonable at that point. Now, I don't mean this as blasphemy, but as an honest assessment of this passage in Mark 6, because we find it again here. Consider the situation. Jesus and the apostles have set out to a deserted place. The people are inspired by Jesus' actions, meaning his miracles, and by his teachings. And when the crowd arrives, Jesus doesn't kick them out. He doesn't send them home. No, he has compassion. And he begins to welcome the people, to serve the people who are searching, who are hurting, who are lost, by speaking with them and teaching them God's truths. Now, how large of a crowd was this that Jesus was welcoming? Is it just a few? No, it's 5,000. No, actually, it's not even 5,000. It's many thousands more than that, because you may note in the text, it was 5,000 males. They only counted adult males back then. They didn't count the women and the children who were there. And the longer that Jesus talks, the more he teaches, the hungrier this huge crowd becomes. And at first they were hungry for Jesus' words, but now they are hungry for good food. And Jesus turns to his disciples and he says, "You feed them." It appears as if Jesus has created a situation of great demand, needing immense resources, but does nothing to provide for those needed resources. So put yourself just for a moment in one of the disciples of Jesus' sandals. And as people crowd forward demanding to be served, Jesus turns to you and says, "You handle it." Small wonder that the disciples protested. They said to Jesus, "Are we to go and to buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them to eat?" Their response, translated into contemporary English, is, "Are you crazy? Where will we get the money to pay for the food to feed all these people?" A reasonable person can readily identify with the disciples. They live with this syndrome that I referred to earlier called life in your face. And when most people come face to face with a life in your face moment, do you know what they often say? "I can't do it. I'm not strong enough. I'm not rich enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not talented enough. I'm not old enough. I'm too old. This is too much for me to handle." But what Jesus wants us to discover is that when there is a need, you can handle it with his help if you do your part. When you encounter a life in your face moment, do this. Trust Jesus. Do what you can. Do it with joy. Do it with optimism. Do it with excellence. I remember a story I was once told about a mighty warrior mounted on a magnificent horse, trotting down a road, and everyone, of course, made certain to get out of the way, get off the streets. He noticed, however, directly in his path, in the very middle of the road, there was a sparrow. And the bird was lying on its back with its legs sticking up into the air. And the horseman drew in his reins, halted and dismounted, and he went to the sparrow and he asked, "Are you dead? And if not, what are you doing in the middle of the road with your feet in the air?" "No," answered the bird, "I'm not dead, but I heard that the sky might fall down, and I'm helping to hold it up." And the warrior thundered and shook with laughter. He rolled on the ground, he slapped his thighs, and at last he wiped the tears from his eyes. And he said, "You silly bird, even if the sky did fall down, what difference could you possibly make with those puny, spindly little legs?" "Well," explained the sparrow, "you do what you can do." Generous living begins right here. When there's a need, trust Jesus is with you. Do what you can do. The gospel story from Mark tells us the disciples ascertained how much food there was. And Jesus took the food, he blessed it, he broke it, and he gave it back to the disciples. And under his direction, they passed it out to the hungry crowd. They did what they could do, because in the hands of Jesus, whatever you do, if you do it with excellence, it is enough. Such is the way of faith. We share what we have, we do our part cheerfully, with a positive spirit, with a sense of excellence, and in the hands of Jesus, it is transformed. Amen.